and welcome to this, the latest in your active series of virtual events, kindly powered by Neste. This one is all about aviation, and how are we going to enable aviation to meet its climate goals to make a net zero future possible? And is it possible? Those are the things that we're going to be considering today. Now, aviation accounts for around 4% of the EU's total CO2 emissions, and before the pandemic, under a business case as usual scenario, that was only predicted to increase along with passenger demand and services. But the international community is committed to reducing its impact and climate breakdown under the Paris Agreement. And aviation has committed itself to being a part of that challenge. Although a smaller offender compared to other sectors, it is still on board. But how do we get there? We've assembled a panel of experts to go through that debate with you today. And it is my absolute pleasure to introduce all of them to you right now. First, we have Elsi Katainen, who is a member of the European Parliament and also a member of the Transport Committee. Under normal circumstances, you would have likely been our host at the European Parliament, but of course that hasn't been possible. I'll hand over to you for introductory remarks just after I introduce our three other guests. Then we have Torsten Lang, who is Executive Vice President for Renewable Aviation at Neste. Moving on to Lars Andersen Reza, who is Head of Environment and Corporate Social Responsibility at Scandinavian Airlines. Welcome to you, Lars. And finally, but not least, is Philip Cornelis, Director of Aviation at the European Commission's DG Move. Welcome to all of you. It's an interesting, technical and important topic that we have for you today. And now it's over to you, Elsie, for your introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear participants. Good afternoon. I hope everyone is well and healthy during these exceptional times. I want to thank first of all Neste and Euractiv for organizing this seminar and inviting me to speak. We all know how major and profound transition the transport sector is facing with decarbonization. A few months ago in the European Parliament, we voted for a new ambitious 60 CO2 reduction target for 2030 and climate neutrality target for EU and also for each member state by year 2050. To reach the ambitious goals of the European Green Deal, we need emission reduction in every sector, including transport. Decarbonization our transport sector in a fair way is no doubt one of the trickiest tasks we have ahead of us. Member states like mine with long distances and sparse population need to figure out how to move towards more sustainable mobility without weakening accessibility and competitiveness of our industries. A broad approach is needed, looking at every transport mode, including aviation, which has been, despite the technological progress, one of the fastest growing sources of greenhouse gas emission before the pandemic. Luckily, we already have available solutions that can bring significant emission reduction fast. Sustainable aviation fuel can provide the needed emission reduction. However, the uptake and use of SAFs needs a stable EU policy framework that creates certainty for companies to invest and boosts innovations in the sector. We are eagerly waiting for the Commission to propose a new Refuel EU Aviation initiative early next year. That would possibly include an EU-wide minimum biofuel mandate for aviation. We already see many countries in Europe moving towards this direction. For example, in my home country, Finland, the government is aiming to introduce a blending mandate, which would increase the share of SAFs to 30% by 2030. This is one of the most ambitious targets in the EU and in line with Finland's target of climate neutrality by 2035. Norway has already set a blending mandate earlier this year. Sweden recently announced that it would introduce a mandate starting next year. There are also similar plans in Netherlands, France and Spain, for example. Moreover, next summer, the Commission is going to propose to amend the Renewable Energy Directive, also known as RED II, which regulates sustainable feedstock. This gives us a great opportunity to maintain a wide enough sustainable feedstock pool to cover our demand for biofuels, also for aviation. Here too, the policy must be encouraging and supportive for new innovations. This way we can reach best results for environment and climate as well. We also need more research and innovation in the field. EU's multi-annual budget negotiations have been more difficult than usual, but we finally have a deal for different programs. The EU budget for innovation and research is not as ambitious as we would have hoped in the Parliament, but in the end, we will have a strong budget of 85 billion euros for the next 7 years to cover also many important research challenges related to aviation. In addition, I'm happy to see the Commission recently published upgrade on the Single European Sky, which can help to cut emissions in aviation by creating shorter and more efficient flying paths in Europe. Just yesterday, we had a first exchange of views on this regulation in the Transport Committee, and I can say that Parliament is very motivated to finally make this reform happen. Lastly, I want to stress that we have now an opportunity to build a credible roadmap for greener aviation post-pandemic. I'm delighted to hear today from the actors in the field and from the Commission on how we can make it to happen. With these words, I conclude and wish all good and fruitful webinar. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Elsie. Over to you now, Torsten, for your 7 minutes. Tell us more about where Neste stands in all this.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Elsie, for that perfect introduction. And it's covering a lot of the things I want to bring up here as well. And we're talking about how to enable aviation to meet its climate goals, and we're asking ourselves, net zero 2050, is that really possible? And I think it's important for all of us to be reminded what does net zero 2050 mean? And it means nothing less but a radical change across the entire economy, doing away from fossil fuels and other sources of emissions wherever possible. And then for the rest, every ton of CO2 that we emit in 2050, we have to match it by removing the same amount from the atmosphere. And I cannot spare you from some slides here from Neste. So here you can see that Neste is already on its journey to meeting this net zero 2050 target. And we started our journey on the renewables in the late 90s and became in the meantime world's #1 in renewable fuels, both diesel and renewable jet fuel. As world's third most sustainable company, we managed to reduce our customers' carbon footprint by almost 10 million tons, which is the equivalent of 3.5 million cars, and we're planning to double that in the next decade to come. All of this can only be done if you never stop. Never stop researching, finding new ways, new materials, improve efficiency, and modernize production. This is, by the way, also something we have been committing to. Neste's goal is to have its production carbon neutral in 2035. Therefore, we invest a lot of money in human resources and in R&D. Almost 70% of our R&D budget is invested in finding new raw materials. All of them certainly have to meet the strict sustainability criteria. When we're talking about 2050, it might give the impression that we can leave the toughest job for last, betting on technologies that have not been invented yet, for the generations later being able to stomach even more drastic changes than we are facing now. I can only say Neste is of the opinion there is no time to waste. And there's a lot we can do already now. We are increasing our capacities from currently 3.2 million tons a year to almost 4.5 million tons in 2023. But let's have some words about the product that I'm in charge of, and this is sustainable aviation fuel. If we can maybe move to the next slide. Neste My Sustainable Aviation Fuel is a product that can help immediately and already now by reducing the greenhouse gas emissions up to 80% compared to fossil fuel over the life cycle. It has additional benefits. SAF is significantly reducing the non-CO2 climate effects, as you can see from the latest IASA report that has been launched earlier this week. But the real beauty of that product is that this is a 100% drop-in solution. It doesn't need any technical adjustments, not on the aircraft, neither on the logistics. So it can be used as it comes, and it can be used as fossil fuel. It's made 100% from renewable waste and residues, raw material, and most importantly, it is available now. We can already start now. And if we move to the next page, you can see that the foundation for that is already being laid. Neste SAF capacity will grow to 1.5 million tons in 2023 from currently around 100,000 tons. And we will continue to expand with new technologies. As I mentioned earlier, we're investing a lot of money into new technologies. With RED II being fully put in place also on EU member level, we could unleash feedstocks at the level 1, which you can see here in dark blue, that are then enough to cover 10% of world's jet fuel requirements already now. On top of that, if you see level 2, we have potential to cover all of the world's requirements in the decade to come by using on top municipal waste, lignocellulosics like cover crops, agricultural residues, forestry residues, and wood processing waste, but also algae. This altogether would lead to availability that could cover more than 120% of what the aviation industry would need in 2030. But wide feedstock acceptance is critical for ensuring that ambitious SAF scale-up targets are achievable. And if you move to the next page, you can see that this is really something we can still work on. The whole green circle that you can see here would allow the roughly 35 million tons that I mentioned earlier. But currently, when we're talking about feedstocks for sustainable aviation fuel in the European Union, there is the opinion that only the little gap of the 2.7 million tons is something that can be made available for renewable aviation. And we can just tell you, if we are open-minded and we just make RED II come through as it allows, we have those 35 million tons available. Important to be technology agnostic, but also feedstock agnostic. What is it that we need from the industry, and what is it that we need from policymakers? If we can move to the next slide, please. I mentioned earlier, immediate large scale up of sustainable aviation fuel is needed right now. Certainly, as Elsie mentioned earlier, a separate mandate would be the best to create a credible long-term market. But in the meantime, an incentive such as RED II, if it comes fully into force, would help to bridge the price gaps that are really important to help to build up momentum for the demand. It goes without saying, and this is also something that Elsie mentioned earlier, R&D support is needed to unleashing new volumes and new raw materials to really making flying more sustainable and acceptable. And with that, I would like hand back to our moderator. Thanks a lot.
Many thanks, Thorsten. Over to you now, Lars, for your perspective. 7 minutes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to talk in this very, very important topic. We, as a Scandinavian Airlines, one of many airlines in the global market, is of course heavily affected by the COVID-19 situation. But our ambitions when it comes to sustainability and environmental sustainability, as we talk about here, is of course solid and even accelerated in this crisis. We do anticipate to reduce our emissions by 25% in the next 5 years in absolute terms, which of course is one of the cornerstones in our development, in order to ensure that we support the different ambitions and the national targets that are set up regarding climate affecting emissions. As mentioned by Torsten, and of course looking at sustainable aviation fuel will be an extremely important part of achieving the emission reduction that we need to do in order to be part of a long-term sustainable future society as well. I mean, looking at the volumes we have available today that we buy from Neste and distributed by the energy suppliers in our home market, we do see that that volume will increase dramatically over the next coming year. When we look at our plans and our business plan, as we can see right now, we will need somewhere up until approximately between 8 and 10% of our fuel need in 2025 needs to be sustainable aviation fuel. It all depends on the life cycle analysis, of course, but if we get the same type of product as we see today, up approximately around up until 10%. I mean, our aircrafts, of course, we are replacing them with more energy efficient models. We are in a big transition, as of course different airlines are in different times can achieve rather big emission reductions. And when we look at the aircrafts to come in the future, there's a lot of discussion, at least in our market, on electricity, either through battery storage for electricity or fuel cells, and of course also our contribution to Airbus in their hydrogen concepts that looks very promising and can potentially be a revolution for emission reduction over the next coming decades. But in short term, up until 2050 and beyond, I would say, sustainable aviation fuel will of course be critical for achieving the emission reductions we need. If we look at our market, as mentioned before, we are under a blend-in mandate in Norway, 0.5%, and there are a discussion and there's a process implementing a similar system with reduction mandate in Sweden that is currently right now being under process in the political system. We do see that we get sustainable aviation fuels into the system in Norway, and of course that enables us to reduce the emissions. There are still some topics that need to be addressed on who will actually get emission reduction, and we are a little bit worried that it might be somebody else than aviation, but that all has to be clarified in the coming process. So all in all, when we see the regulatory frameworks being put in place, we need to buy even more sustainable aviation fuel the coming years. If we look beyond 2025 and to 2030, we anticipate to use at least the amount of fuel that we use in our domestic market in sustainable aviation fuel. And we do see the possibility to have, if the prerequisites are right, I would say, an ambition to almost half our emissions. And then, of course, we will need more than 20% of our fuel needs to come from sustainable aviation fuels. So in order to facilitate this, we support a well-balanced economic measure for stimulating, incentivizing sustainable aviation fuel. We do see, exactly as we see with other economic measures or in other systems, that it's always beneficiary if it is more on a regional or a global level than on a national level. And it has to be aligned with other systems, of course. At the end of the day, we want to reduce emissions, and we know for a fact that sustainable aviation fuel will be a critical piece of the puzzle, a very, very big piece of the puzzle in order to facilitate the emission reduction going forward. We have actually tested the market. We offer to our customers through different types of products to purchase sustainable aviation fuel to, so to speak, upgrade their travels and reduce their emissions. And we do see a very big interest in purchasing this product, of course, heavily affected by the current situation and during the pandemic. But we do anticipate that we will get through this, and we will, of course, see that our services will be needed in a greater degree. And of course, we hope and we will work very hard to make sure that our customers and all our stakeholders around us do understand what the meaning and the purpose and the benefits from sustainable aviation fuels. So all in all, I would say that the need for sustainable aviation fuel will grow dramatically, and the prerequisites has to be addressed. The incentives, of course, has to be aligned in order for airlines and other stakeholders to purchase and to use these products, because it is a key factor in order to ensure that we have a possibility to travel over great distances with almost or net zero emissions in the future. So thank you very much for...
Many thanks for that, Lars. There's plenty of issues you've raised that I'm keen to come back to in the Q&A. Last but not least, Philip, over to you for your 7 minutes. Tell us all about what the Commission is cooking up at the moment.
Yes, thank you very much, Sam, and also from my side, many thanks to Euractiv and Neste for organizing this exchange. So let me say a few words from the perspective of the European Commission in terms of the policy context. It all starts from the European Green Deal, the Green Deal that was adopted almost a year ago now, and which set the overall ambition for the EU to be the first climate neutral continent by 2050. And to achieve that, transport will need to reduce its emissions by around 90%, all modes taken together. All modes will have to contribute, including aviation. In the past months, of course, aviation sector has been very heavily affected by the COVID outbreak, and it will take months, if not years, to recover. But for us, this is not affecting the level of ambition of the Green Deal. And we should use the phase of recovery as an opportunity for aviation to put itself on a new path and to accelerate its decarbonization. And I believe also the industry is supporting this approach. We will be going ahead very soon, actually next week, with the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy that will set out the work program and the ambitions, objectives of the Commission and of Commissioner Vălean between now and the coming years. This will come out, as I said, next week, and will, together with the other key deliverables of the European Green Deal, shape the way in which we will become that carbon-free continent. There are many initiatives that will have to contribute to the greening of aviation. Mrs. Katainen referred already to the Single Sky as one initiative to contribute. There's also research into new technologies, new propulsion systems through the Clean Aviation Joint Undertaking, to which I think also Mr. Anderson was alluding. And there are many other initiatives because there is no single measure that will totally green the aviation sector. But it is very clear at this stage that one of the key measures, particularly in the coming years, will be the reliance on more sustainable aviation fuels. And we believe that our initiative called Refuel EU Aviation will realize the ambition to boost significantly the production and uptake of sustainable aviation fuels, with a focus on the most advanced biofuels as well as power to liquid. There has been, thankfully, in the past months, a strong support coming from the industry, both the airlines, aviation sector and the fuel sector. Strong support to put in place a stable, long-term regulatory framework to stimulate the production uptake of those fuels. And there is also a strong momentum, I must say, on the side of many of our member states, and several of them have openly supported this initiative already and are developing national initiatives of a very similar nature. Now, the reason for this strong momentum is, of course, that the aviation sector realizes that it needs to reduce its emissions significantly, and that besides cleaner fuels, there are not many other options in the short term. And to boost sustainable aviation fuels, it's clear that legislation has an important role to play, particularly to untie the knot waiting for demand and demand waiting for supply at a good price. So a legislative initiative for us has to encourage investment in production capacity, to enable economies of scale, to bring production costs down, and to establish a competitive market. To do this and to prepare this initiative, we are in the process of finalizing an impact assessment so that we'll be able to produce that legislation by the end of the first quarter of next year. So we are looking currently at the best way to design such a SAF blending mandate that would be able to break the chicken and egg situation I just referred to. And we are considering, of course, several options, several dimensions. Should we have an obligation on supply or on demand, or a bit of both? What should be the ramp up of the blending requirement? Should we follow the ramp up that is implicit in the climate target plan, for example? What should be the scope of a measure? Should it focus on intra-EU traffic or all traffic? Should we use volume-based targets or greenhouse gas intensity targets? Should we have perhaps a specific mandate for certain fuels? And what should be the reporting and enforcement requirements? We will design this initiative with the objective of attaining a maximum impact for the environment, while at the same time ensuring a level playing field for all our airlines, and making sure that the measure is simple and enforceable. And naturally, there will also be a need and an availability of financing to accelerate research, clean aviation, I mentioned before, but also hopefully to support the growth of production capacity, in particular production capacity based in Europe by companies such as Neste and others, and financing to accompany the market in bridging the price gap with conventional jet fuel. So those are really the parameters that we are currently looking at and hoping to be able to make a concrete proposal early in the next year. I look forward to the discussion in this workshop, and thank you very much, Sam.
Thanks, Philip. We'll come back to many of the things that you raised, I'm sure. Just a bit of housekeeping before we proceed with the Q&A. To everyone watching at home, there is a Q&A function on the platform which you are using. Please do use it. Two of you have already put questions in there. You got ahead of me there. We'll do our best to get to those towards the end. But for my questions, first of all, my influence as moderator gives me that prerogative. Elsie, just over to you. As far as the coronavirus pandemic goes, it's had a huge effect on air travel, on the aviation industry. 90% drop in demand in places. A lot of experts are saying it's going to take years for any sort of business as usual scenario to re-emerge. Do you see the pandemic as an opportunity then in that case for aviation to really rethink the way it does business, to use more sustainable aviation fuels? Or does there need to be a balance between recovery and change?
Yes, this is a very big question. Thank you for that. And as in all level, we have seen that this terrible pandemic have given us a new perspective in many ways, and I see that also in aviation and aviation fuel level also. In the Parliament, we are determined to ensure efficient decarbonization of aviation in this light. We have to build back stronger, and I believe EU's recovery package should support strongly both transport and tourism sector in this way. I think pandemic and its several impact on the aviation sector and I see here a lot of potential for the aviation sector and sustainable aviation fuels where recovery could offer needed boost for growth and innovations. But I think it is also very important to take account to every member state's different circumstances, and every member states could have their own ways to get forward with this major topic.
Thank you, Elsie. Philip, just turning to you. I mean, the Commission, the Green Deal guides almost everything that you do at the moment, I guess. And you do have a huge year coming up in 2021. All of the clean energy legislation has to be revised and seen if it's fit for purpose or not, I understand. How are you going to make sure that you have the new Refuel EU initiative, you have the ETS revision, potentially the RED II tweaks and changes? How do you make sure that all of this fits together so that, for aviation's purposes at least, all of this makes sense with one another? I mean, this link between Refuel EU and RED II, I assume, will be the most implicit in a way. How do you make sure that that is not fighting against one another, for example?
Thank you. First, also a comment on the timing of all this work, because it's true we are in the middle of the COVID crisis and soon hopefully recovery, and that is definitely the main focus in the coming months and years to put the economy back in order, and in particular, in our case, the aviation and travel sector. But at the same time, it's also the right moment to prepare the future and to come forward with those legislative initiatives, present them to the Parliament and the Council, so that we can be in good shape in a couple of years to implement them already and not lose time during the recovery. The legislative process can definitely take place already now, and for alternative fuels, we envisage the first obligation to kick in 2025. That requires, of course, that in the preceding years, the industry has already a legal certainty and can make the necessary investments. Now, on the question of consistency, you are right. We have many initiatives in the pipeline that are all working towards the green objectives and the decarbonization, and many of them also impacting directly the aviation sector. It is our task to make sure that they are not duplicating each other, not contradicting each other, but rather complementing each other to have overall the necessary impact to promote the greening, not overshoot either, but to get it right. And there we profit from the fact that the Commission is an integrated organization where we don't have separate ministries, and all the services working on whether it's transport, energy, climate, environment are working hand in hand, based, for example, on the same forecasts and taking the same assumptions, working hand in hand to make sure all those initiatives are well coordinated. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Lars, just turning to you, as you know, you're at the forefront of all of these changes being made as you are involved with airlines. If we look at sort of the technical side at the moment, Boeing have demonstrated that sustainable aviation fuels can be flown at the 50% threshold that's currently set at the moment. Rolls-Royce are testing engines at the moment that only run on sustainable aviation fuels. They don't rely on a blend with kerosene. Are there any other kind of technical obstacles? Because we've already mentioned the price points and the supply and demand issues. Just in terms of the technical nature of these fuels, are they ready to go, basically?
Yeah, I mean, the certification that are subject to every production pathway and every raw material is, of course, set at the specific certification process. And as you said, there are some initiatives and there are some work ongoing in order to look at how to increase that blend-in level. If we look at today's levels, of course, it would be very beneficiary to have, if you have 50% already, then we will have an issue with this. So it's very good that there are activities ongoing looking at increasing the level. But at the same time, we have to realize that we are at a very low level today. That will increase, and it's important, of course, that we have the possibility to use as much as possible at certain locations in order to facilitate for a more efficient logistics, so we don't have to distribute the fuel potentially depending on where it's produced. But I would say that there is many processes regarding different production pathways, regarding different product methods, and of course also to look at how to potentially increase the level. From an airline perspective, we of course what should I say? We will only use it at that level that the engine manufacturer and the certification bodies have stipulated, of course. So we look forward to the fact that if this is increased, when it's increased, that we can improve our logistics and use more at certain locations in order to facilitate a faster transition to lower emissions.
And just going back to a point you made in your opening statement, Lars, about there needs to be clarifications about who gets these emission reductions when they are actually made, whether it's the airlines or I assume the refiners or whatever. Who needs to clarify this for the industry? Is it national governments? Is it the EU? At what point can this point be made more clear?
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the implementation of the Norwegian and the suggested Swedish system, it's not regulated in the reduction mandate legislation. So it has to be adopted somewhere, and it has to be reflected because there might be that the different legislation, of course, don't cover this topic because the reduction mandate, for example, in Sweden, as it looks today, on road transport, they are not subject to other economic measures like the emission trading scheme. So potentially, of course, we don't believe it, but potentially, I mean, it could be that the reduction mandate put in place in Sweden will result in a factual emission reduction somewhere else in the trading scheme, which of course the sole purpose of the reduction mandate is to reduce emission from aviation in Sweden, or starting in Sweden, or fueling in Sweden, maybe I should say. So I mean, we are in it's in the beginning of a process, and it has to be reflected and discussed. And of course, if we buy the product, we should have the emission reduction for sure in order to decarbonize our industry.
Mm-hmm. Just a housekeeping rule to everyone watching at home. Thank you for putting your questions already, but please use the Q&A function, not the chat, because we can't check both of them at once. So, and I don't want to miss out on anything. So. Yeah, just turning to you now, Torsten, about this issue about who gets these emission reductions. As far as Neste is concerned, you're the sustainable company providing all of this fuel to these airlines already. Are you happy for them to be the ones that book the emission reductions because you're part of the chain, or should there be more of a compromise there, for example? How do you think it should work?
Well, certainly, I mean, we're always open for compromises, but we're also fine with booking them ourselves and monetize them and making them available. That's for sure also a solution. I think the Commission certainly has to work on that. We are happy with Neste booking those. And as said, if an airline like SAS then can make use of that and see that as part of their reductions, then I think we are where we have to go. So that's the key here, I think.
And just in your presentation, you sort of highlighted the amount of waste material that is available to actually make these fuels and lock in this carbon that's already been produced. And for example, is there enough of it to go round? Because I mean, aviation isn't the only sector that's going to be coming knocking for these waste materials. For there's the shipping sector, road transport, petrochemicals. Is now the moment for aviation basically to put its hand up and say, we want to get this slice of the pie before other sectors are too slow to get it, for example?
Yeah, I think we have to split the aviation sector in different parts, and I think Lars was already referring also to the long haul operations, which I see one of the most difficult to decarbonize sectors, where we would need and will need those kinds of products, hence raw materials, for a longer future. When it comes to short-haul operations, I see clearly aviation industry shifting rather quickly, maybe also in either not operating short hauls or flying electrically, finding other solutions. But I think we can all agree that the aviation industry, and this is why I think it's important to putting our hands up, is that industry that would manage to have alternative solutions latest. On road transportation, talking about electric vehicles, I think it is much easier to achieving our goals technically, and we heard already Lars talking about hydrogen and some very promising projects on the Airbus side. This will clearly come. This is the future, but it's not something that we will see probably in this decade. If you're talking to Airbus, they're talking about maybe having hydrogen aircraft flying in 15 to 20 years from now on. So if we now not putting our hands up on aviation, we will fall short and we will not be able to getting the raw materials that we need. And as said earlier, and if I maybe also may refer to what Philip was saying earlier, if you're not open to the feedstocks, and Philip was talking about advanced biofuels here, and if you remember the pie I was showing earlier, and if we only refer on advanced biofuels in our activities here, we would only unleash the 2.7 million tons that I was showing in my pie, and we would totally forget to talk about the other remaining 30 to 32 million tons that could be made available if we're just opening our scope and being open to other raw materials that are also all well sustainable and meeting the sustainability criteria.
Thank you, Torsten. Just turning back to you, Elsie, about the Renewable Energy Directive. You mentioned about feedstocks as well. Do you think that the way it is at the moment, RED II is fine as it is, it just needs to be implemented properly by national governments, or it needs to be reviewed by the Commission next year so that it is more fit for purpose?
I prefer it to implement it as it is now, because in the earlier round there was a big work done with RED II. And I think it is very well taking account every aspect that is needed. And I think it is waste of time to change it now too much. It is very demanding at this moment. But Samuel, is it okay if I ask something?
Of course, please do. Please do, Elsie. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Because question that I often run into is what this biofuel mandate would mean for ticket prices. My understanding is that the effect would be modest, but I'd like to ask Torsten and Lars, how do you see this issue? How do we create legislation that encourages the most advanced operators at the field?
Well, Elsie, that's I mean, it's a very tricky question. What impact would that have on ticket prices? I mean, I'm certainly not here to advocating higher ticket prices, but if you see aviation industry and where it evolved in the last, let's say, in the recent years, with people flying, let's say, from Helsinki to Dublin to having a cheap beer, I think something is wrong with the ticket prices, and certainly sustainable aviation fuel will have an impact on the ticket price, but it's not as high as everybody thinks, because everybody thinking about the huge price discrepancy between fossil fuel and sustainable aviation fuels. Just to give you an idea, if you add 2% of sustainable aviation fuel, which we're thinking is the appropriate start for a mandate on that kind of distance flight that I was just referring to, would add not even $2 to the ticket. So can ticket prices cope with that? Can passengers cope with that once they understood what it means to fly more sustainable? Yes, I think so. Is a mandate doing harm? No, I don't think so, because if we all educate the people in the right way and they understand, I think they would also be willing to pay an amount which is not even half of the Coca-Cola that they're buying at the airport when they're waiting for their flight to depart.
Tickets question.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the products that we offer today, it's typically on a 1-hour flight for 100% virtual blend. It's €30 approximately. And of course, we are maybe not the airline with that type of business model that offers customers to go fly and drink beer, but at the end of the day, it is if we have a high blend, of course, it's a considerable cost increase for the tickets. But at the same time, of course, investing in new aircrafts, in energy efficiency measures, and all other investments that we need to do in order to reach our targets is, of course, also a substantial cost that we need to mitigate and to be part of our cost. But at the low level that we are discussing now, of course, it's a couple of potentially euros that we will look at. But in the longer run, but then of course the production costs and the different types of efficiency gains from large scale commercialization will of course mean that the cost will go down. So it all depends on how high level of blending that is required, and how you prioritize between different how you use the raw materials and where you put the product. But at the end of the day, if we don't get the emission reduction, then of course that's a high cost for no gain. But I would say at the low level it's manageable with today's costs. But if the level is too high, then of course it will have an influence on the ticket price.
And just a question for you, Philip, about the Renewable Energy Directive. I've tried my best to follow it for the last few years, but of course I'm only human, so I can't understand all of it. This week, the European Environment Agency announced its preliminary data for 2019 in terms of emissions. And it warned that in terms of getting renewable energy into transport, we face a bit of an obstacle there in meeting the 10% 2020 target. The way things stand at the moment, are sustainable aviation fuels counted under that 10%, or is it still they have to meet certain criteria in order to be classed as such? I mean, maybe you could just try your best to explain how those two things fit together.
Well, Sam, when it comes to RED II, I'm probably less than human because I'm really not an expert in this. I think it does account, but it's a different. It's designed in a different way. This instrument with overall targets to be achieved. I think what I can say on this topic is that we do have a limited supply of feedstock, even though it is still large and not entirely fully tapped yet. We should, of course, avoid a situation where we improve the environmental performance of one mode of transport at the expense of another. So we have to think more holistically, particularly in a decade that we're entering now, where all sectors of the economy will need to decarbonize in sector. It was different in the past. Aviation was in ETS and contributing to decarbonization elsewhere. Now it needs to be in sector. Secondly, we see that there are not many decarbonization alternatives for aviation in the short to medium term, except for those alternative fuels. That's why probably we need to have some prioritization of the use of those fuels in the aviation sector, where other modes or other industries have alternatives available to which they can shift. So we will need to look at this holistically and make sure we put in place a mandate and a ramp up that is at the same time ambitious, but also does not create an artificial shortage that would unnecessarily impact on prices, because our objective is not to increase the cost of flying or make it less accessible for people. Our objective is to make it more environmentally sustainable. So that's really, for us, an important consideration. Final point, it is the case that airlines are able and will be able to get credit for the uptake of sustainable fuels under the ETS scheme and the future CORSIA scheme. So that's definitely going to be the case. Broader than that, we will have to make sure that there is no double counting, that the same gains are not counted by different industries cumulatively. Thank you.
Just a final point to pick up on there, Philip. This, like you said it before, that the Commission has to really think about whether or not a blending mandate, for example, would apply to intra-EU flights or all international flights. How, just from your experience, how difficult is it to regulate aviation in this way because of its international context like this? Is it maybe the most difficult sector in that regard?
Yes, it is probably one of the most difficult. First of all, the scale of the industry is very much European, not so much national. Half of all traffic is between EU member states, but it's also more than European, it's also global. And it is very tradable. It's a service, so also on the side of any carbon adjustment mechanisms, it is not obvious to put something like that in place in aviation, and we always need to be on our guard to make sure whatever we put in place is not going to create carbon leakage to other parts of the world, nor undue advantage for our airlines. So definitely the trick, and I'm happy to take your advice on that and the other panelists, is how can we maximize the environmental impact of that mandate whilst remaining, of course, within our jurisdiction, and making sure that there is no competitive distortion.
Thanks, Philip. There's quite a few questions from our audience. I guess we can start making our way through them at the moment. There's a question from Anne Marlin. Thank you, Anne Marlin. Could someone say some words on the EU voluntary schemes available to certify sustainable aviation fuels? I think one of you mentioned earlier about how certification is one of the challenges that faces SAF kind of rollout. Does anyone have any points to make on the voluntary schemes?
Voluntary scheme is now approved. I mean, we just got approval that both ISCC and RSB will be able to qualify for those schemes. So I think from that side, we are ready to go and being able to qualify the sustainable aviation fuels to that extent.
Thanks, Torsten. There's another question here from Sarah. It's about palm oil, and it's to you, Philip, and you, Torsten. Would Neste and the European Commission agree that no palm oil or any of its derivatives can be used in jet fuels in the future? Maybe you could both say something about palm oil. It's a very, very divisive issue, I guess, because of its links with deforestation and imports. Yeah, palm oil. Where do you stand?
As you may know, or I have said it already, we're not using palm oil in our sustainable aviation fuels, and we don't have any plans to using that. I have to admit, if you look into the palm oil story, there is certainly certified sustainable sources, and Neste has implemented a dashboard where you can fully have access and track the way Neste is sourcing for part of its production sustainable palm oil. But as said, this is nothing that we would use in our sustainable aviation fuels, so it's not really a topic for the program I'm talking about here.
Thanks for clearing that up, Torsten. As far as you're concerned, Philip, I mean, I guess this already goes into how the Commission has legislated on palm oil already, I assume.
Yes, that was exactly what I wanted to say. We're not going to put in place a specific new regime or a new sustainability framework or new criteria specifically for aviation. We will use the existing framework in RED 2 and in whatever future revision of the RED will take place. So we will abide by that. But of course, we are keen to make sure that the aviation sector is perceived as being in the forefront of pushing those fuels that will be sustainable and usable in the long term, because for aviation, this is not a short-term transition technology. It's going to be with us, as others said, for many decades to come, up to 2050 and beyond, because we will not be able to replace all operations or all aircraft.
Thank you, Philip. Lars, there's a series of questions here. I'll do my best to sort of put them together into one neat package for you. It's from Penelope and Rasmus. From Penelope, it's about, could you just say a bit more about the SAF purchasing program that SAS actually runs at the moment? And just for me, how does it actually work? Do you buy a block of fuel for the flight that you are going to go on, or is it sort of put in a common pot? And then the other question from Rasmus, it's essentially, do you think that COVID has spelled the end for low-cost, super cheap tickets, basically? Is this sort of a taking off point for aviation to be priced perhaps more fairly? What do you think?
Well, to start with our product, we have developed a product that we sell as an ancillary service, where we have identified time blocks of 20 minutes that you can compile in your ticket. So if you have a 1-hour flight, you will have a suggestion to buy 3 blocks for 20 minutes, and they will cost approximately 10 euros a piece. So if you purchase them, which I do myself, we promise to purchase and fill in mass balanced sustainable aviation fuel delivered from Neste in our aircrafts in the coming period. So that's a way of doing it, and that's of course additional to all the regulatory requirements that are put in place. When it comes to the development of business models, I do see that aviation industry is currently in a situation where there's going to be a lot of debt that has to be repaid, and of course the cost for tickets will potentially be a little bit higher. But of course, those who have managed to mitigate that will of course have a more competitive or a competitive advantage coming out of this. Whether or not that will mean the end of a specific business model, I really don't know. I do know that we are here to offer our services to and from Scandinavia, and that we are going to reduce our emissions by at least 25% in the next coming years. And I assume that the competitive landscape and the customers would like to have a more sustainable product offering served, which of course also will be integrated in those business models that are typically not so specifically connected to purchase of this kind of emission reduction products that we are talking about right now.
Thanks for that, Lars. Just a bit of a technical one for you, Philip. Again, no problem if it's a little bit too annexy, shall we say. It's from Angel. It's a question for Philip. A SAF blending mandate including waste lipids from Annex 9 would deprive EU waste biodiesel producers from their feedstocks. Why destroy a well-established industry delivering renewable fuels? I guess to sum it up, is there a danger that the Refuel EU initiative would take away from other industries that are already established? Is the Commission aware of that?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's an issue that has been brought to our attention by the biodiesel industry, and that we are taking very seriously, and it's being looked at precisely in the impact assessment that we are now preparing. The whole purpose of an impact assessment is to assess what impact particular will have on all the players, whether it's the producers, the passengers, the environment, competing producers, the overall achievement of our goals. So all this will be assessed in the impact assessment, and it's an issue we are aware of and that we are taking indeed very seriously. Because I understand there's also quite a few smaller and medium-sized companies active in this area.
Just a question for you, Elsie. You made an excellent point earlier about how Finland, for example, has a different situation to other countries given how sparsely populated different areas are and how big the country is. But this idea of having an EU-wide blending mandate, for example, is that compatible with the idea of every country being slightly different to one another? Would it be not easier to let countries have some leeway in this way, to have different mandates to one another? I mean, how do you think that should be managed?
I think that could be a good win-win situation if the member states could come with their own solutions and give something to other member states, and because we are so in different levels and we have so different kind of circumstances, I think it would make competitiveness fair in that place.
Thank you, Elsie. Just a question for you, Torsten, in terms of how Neste goes about business with airlines. If we take car manufacturers as an example, the ones that are moving into electric vehicles, the likes of Volkswagen and BMW have all partnered up with battery producers so that they have this, they have the entire supply chain basically, so they can build their electric cars without fear of not having batteries to put in them. Can you see sort of the similar model emerging with airlines and refiners like yourself, for example, where there is this whole chain already in place, so the likes of SAS or other airlines already know that they can rely on a certain amount of tons per year? How does that actually work?
Yeah, Samuel, I mean, this is a very good question. This business cannot be run without seeing airlines, or let's say everybody in that whole supply chain, as a partner. So what we certainly need and would highly welcome is, commitments from airlines. But this can only be done if, if airlines would be able to bridge the gap between the fossil price and the price that we have to charge for sustainable aviation fuel. So it all comes back to the regulatory environment helping to bridging that gap. But clearly, all the decisions, or let's say most of the decisions that we are doing, are done in collaboration with airlines. And I have to say, not only with airlines, because you need more stakeholders. You need the airports that also do have an interest in making their airports more sustainable. And you may have seen the latest announcement we made for Amsterdam Airport. So we had not only KLM on board, but also Amsterdam Airport. This is key. You cannot do isolated decisions here, and certainly the best thing would be airlines committing to a certain volume that would provide what I mentioned earlier, the demand security that not only we, but also others investors would need in order to invest, and not, investing into uncertainty, because nobody would do that. And if I may just refer back to what Philip was saying earlier, and the questions about the competition between the road and aviation, just to say something here. You mentioned, you remember my slide earlier with that pie. I think the problem with running into a competitive situation can be overcome if we are more open to the feedstocks that are available. So think beyond Annex 9, both A and B. Think about everything that RED 2 would allow to being used as feedstock. And I don't think that we would then have the problems that some people and some industry stakeholders are maybe afraid of.
Well, we're going to have to start wrapping up shortly because of the perils of the time limit. Just the last question for you, Philip, because it's something you mentioned earlier and I meant to pick you up on as well. The power to the synthetic fuels, basically. It's the fuels that are made from using renewable energy, if I understand it correctly. Where do they fit into the Commission's initiatives and plans? Is this something that would come under Refuel EU as well, or is that for another mechanism such as the ETS or the Modernisation Fund or something like that? Maybe you can give us a little bit more info about that.
Yes, it's an important dimension of the initiative that we are working on, because all the projections that we have seen are showing that long term we will need a lot of synthetic fuels, e-fuels, because even though we have in the next years and possibly decades still a lot of scope for expanding the biofuel side and as advanced as possible, we will reach limits at some point, and when we start to ramp up at several dozens of percentages blending, then we will need those fuels. So the question is, to what extent can and should we already stimulate the development of that industry in the coming years? In order for it to be ready to take on that role in the 30s and 40s. So we are leaning towards indeed elements that could help this industry take off, providing also some security for investments, because today this product is not competitive. It is also not easy to produce, as I understand, particularly if you want it to be entirely green, green sources. So it's an industry that may need some help, both on the regulatory side to create demand expectation, and also hopefully some financing from European funds or national funds. And I can think, for example, of the ETS Innovation Fund, but there are others now, also the COVID measures that could contribute to take in investing in that sector.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you to all of you, actually, for your participation in this event. It's a very broad issue, and unfortunately, we don't have any more time to really delve into it. But I'd like to give each of you at least 2 or 3 minutes to kind of give us your closing ideas about the issue. Maybe you could sort of tell us your one ask from the Refuel EU initiative or something along those lines that you would like to see implemented in the here and now. Elsie, over to you first. Give us your thoughts.
Well, thank you. I'd like to thank all the other speakers for your interventions. I see this kind of events are very valuable to our work as a policy makers, to hear the realities and needs of the sector. We heard comments about the pandemic and its several impact on the aviation sector. In the Parliament, we are determined to ensure efficient decarbonization of aviation. In this light, we have to build back stronger, as I already said before, and I believe EU's recovery package should support strongly both transport and tourist sector in this respect, as they are very much intertwined. Finally, I want to thank Neste and Euractiv for organizing this webinar. I hope we can continue this dialogue later. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hopefully it will be face-to-face next time. Who knows? Torsten, over to you. Your take.
Yeah. Thanks, Elsie. Thanks, Sam. And yes, hopefully it's next time face-to-face, but I like this format also very much. We had policymakers, airlines, and producers around today. We didn't have airports, we didn't have passengers, and we didn't have corporates, which also playing an important role, I think, in the overall equation here. So not forgetting them, to take them with on our journey is important for the airline industry to recover. And I think we can all agree that the aviation industry is important. It connects people, it connects economies, it generates business, and by connecting people and cultures, I would say it's even a peacekeeper. But again, it has an impact on the climate. But as we now learned, and as we have seen, we are not helpless. So we can actually start from today, and we have enough of options and opportunities to start. If we do that in a staggered way, if we do with what we have available and what can be made available, and again, this is something I strongly ask policymakers to think about. Be open when implementing RED II, and please make use of all the opportunities RED II is providing. I think then we would have a big portfolio that we can use. And if we use that, and if we can make sure that volumes are available, and if we, on the other hand, generate a market that provides certainty for investors, then the money will come, because money is there. And you see that on the west coast of the US, where respective schemes are in place. You see that to a certain extent in the Netherlands. And you also see that that principle has already been very successful when introducing renewable diesel some 10 years ago. It was a success story, and it is a success story. We would need the same for sustainable aviation fuel in order to making aviation even more sustainable and coming back even stronger from this unprecedented crisis. So thanks for all your comments, and I was very happy to be part of that panel discussion here. Thanks a lot.
Many thanks, Torsten. Over to you, Lars. Your final statements. If you could just unmute, Lars. Sorry.
Thank you very much for being a part of this panel. It has been very, very beneficial for me, and I hope that that it has been for you as well. I would like to echo what Torsten said, to have some incentives. There's a lot of topics in the refuel that is very that could potentially be very good implemented. Funding mechanism, prioritization, some kind of mandate as well on intra-EU level could be beneficial as well. So I think that for the purpose of time, I thank for this, and I'll end there.
Thank you, Lars. Philip, you have a very busy year ahead of you. What's the one thing you'd like us to bear in mind as we go into that period?
Well, first of all, I also want to say I think we managed in this relatively short event to cover most of the policy issues that arise in this on this topic. So well done to you, Sam, and to my fellow panelists, and also to the persons who were asking questions. I would just want to make one comment to finish off with, and that is the importance of a Europe-wide approach. I think it would not be fair that only some airlines or some member states would invest heavily in renewable alternative fuels to aviation. It cannot be only SAS who is doing it on behalf of the whole of Europe. We will only be able to build a real scale if we do this at continental level, at EU level. So where even relatively modest blending percentages will represent an enormous upscaling of production and use. And it's a bit innovative in the sense that a lot of the renewable policy in the past was based on efforts at the member state level. Here we have an industry that is of European dimension, very integrated. And so besides the question of scale, what also will be important for the airlines is that they're able to operate in an internal market where there is a level playing field. The airlines are very sensitive to competitive advantages or disadvantages. And I think, as in many other areas of aviation regulation, it's our job to make sure that the competition is healthy as we push towards decarbonization that will inevitably bring with it a certain cost. Thank you very much again. I was very happy to be part of this discussion.
Thank you, Philip. I can assure you that the moderating is much harder than I make it look. Thank you to all four of you. You must be all busy people. I'll let you get off now, and I hope that you have productive weeks and all this kind of thing. To everyone watching at home, thank you again for tuning in to this latest Euractiv event. It's been a complex topic, I know, but I think, as Philip said, we covered a hell of a lot of ground today, and this is going to be definitely one to watch in the coming weeks, months, years. And yes, thank you to everyone that's engaged with the home. There'll be more coverage of this on Euractiv. And for the time being, if I don't see you before now, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and stay safe. Bye for now.